We've covered some larger-than-life stories so far. We've had Antarctic exploration, gunfights, action. It's all very exciting. We're taking a step back from that. Today, I want to share with you a story, not about whiskey, but of its early ancestor in Ireland. Even moonshiners and bootleggers trace their roots back to this historic libation. But today, this is about more than one bottle, more than one person. This is a collection of smaller stories that created a significant portion of the culture around whiskey. Behind every bottle is hundreds of stories. Every step starting from growing grain until it reaches your glass, this spirit is collecting experiences and stories that it would love to tell you. It's my goal to sift through these stories, find the most meaningful, and bring them forward to your attention. This isn't another whiskey review channel or show. This is pure storytelling. I won't analyze every detailed tasting note of the spirit in the bottle. Instead, I'll dive into the details of the spirit behind the bottle. And this is the spirit of Poitin. Real quick, a little summary of what exactly is Poitin. That way we're all caught up and on the same page. This is basically Irish moonshine, traditionally made from grains such as wheat or rye, a byproduct of milk production called whey, sugar beets, molasses, or potatoes. These ingredients are fermented and distilled into an unaged spirit, normally reaching an ABV somewhere between 40 and 90%. The name comes from the Gaelic term meaning small pot, in reference to the small pot stills used to create it. Also like moonshine, although today there are legal poutines, many consider this to be an oxymoron, as by common definition real poutine can only be made illegally. Now then, since we have a basic understanding of the drink, let's dive into the story. What would be a more exciting place to start than with taxes? In 1661, the English switched from a permit system for the creation of whiskey and other distilled spirits to taxes, in order to collect more money to pay for a civil war. This was the first time the distillation of spirits had ever been taxed. But at the time, the English held very little power to enforce laws in Ireland, especially in the rural areas. So a large portion of the Irish chose to simply ignore it. About 100 years later, in 1760, the English finally realized that the Irish were still distilling without paying taxes, so they decided to try again. They passed a law that outlawed private distillation, which predictably the Irish did not like. The average farmer would be using the extra income from Poitin to help pay for their rent. So now both the farmers and the landlords disliked this new law. Soon more laws were passed, each with their own problems, that cascaded into the perfect conditions to make the golden age of Poitin. The Distillation Act of 1765, for instance, taxed based on the maximum capacity a still could make running 24/7, which accidentally encouraged distillers to use smaller stills and learn to make their product as rapidly as possible, effectively equipping and training distillers so that when future taxes and laws were passed, they were now much more ready to hide their stills in the hills and continue their production without the interference of the crown. This is the setting for some of my favorite stories. Many of the more remote parts of Ireland can be difficult to navigate to, which made the job of the excise men coming to collect taxes near impossible. Of these locations, two have my absolute admiration. The first is Inishowen, which is a peninsula protected by rocky mountains with the only easily accessible path being Mamore Gap. So in 1812, the people banded together, a system of scouts were developed, and when the excise men or government officials were coming, the people would be in position high up on either side of the gap, and hurled rocks down upon the unwelcome visitors, and would even blockade the road. This allowed the moonshiners to continue their craft. This would be quite lucrative, and the town would soon distribute their poitin, even reaching as far as Scotland. It took 3 whole years before the military was called in to retake the region. After this, the Inishowen region, during its independent state for those 3 years, would henceforth be referred to as the Uris Republic of Poitin. A similar story is found with an island with a similar name, Inishmurray. The island allowed its inhabitants plenty of time to notice that a boat was headed towards them and to hide their illegal stills and moonshine before the men landed. But to ensure they had plenty of time, the local captains would normally circle the island a couple times, looking for a suitable landing spot on the rocky coast. In exchange, of course, they would receive some of that illegal distillate. This allowed for the island to run their stills and create poitin with little to no interference. Eventually, sometime in the late 1850s or early 60s, the authorities came up with a plan to finally stop the illegal operations. They placed a police station on the island that would be continually manned by at least 1 sergeant and 2 constables. This effectively crippled the island's economy and slowly caused the population to dwindle, until, in the 1890s, the people of Inishmurray had enough and decided to boycott the police department, cutting off their communications and supplies, and eventually forcing the station to shut down, finally allowing the moonshiners to resume their work. Other parts of Ireland were not as fortunate to have natural barriers opposing the authorities, so a method was developed where a wooden board was laid on the ground with a metal rod sticking up into the air. Someone would then place their ear against the rod and wait. By doing this, they could allegedly hear horses from up to 5 miles away, giving them plenty of time to hide their stills away in the mountains and foothills, then distill during windy weather to help dispel the smoke. Using these methods, poitin production continued for centuries. During World War II, when American troops were stationed in Ireland, they were given a small book titled The Pocket Guide to Northern Ireland, which contained sound advice for the men, such as to avoid talking about politics, don't get involved with the women, and that up in the hills you may be offered a drink of poitin, which it then goes on to describe as dynamite. A legal version of poitin is still being made exclusively in Ireland, and its cultural effects are still very present. Plenty of Irish folk songs make a reference to the spirit, and even the phrase dead drunk and the tradition of holding awake are in reference to drinking enough of it to put yourself into a stupor. So before you buried your dead, you'd hold awake and continue to drink and party around them in hopes that they might just wake up from this death-like state. And if you'd like to indulge in this historic Irish drink yourself, it's readily available for you. You can even find cans of it at most grocery stores, labeled under one of its nicknames, Mountain Dew, a nickname referencing to how their stills were hidden away in the foothills of the mountains.
You know Mountain Dew's not alcoholic, right?
Wait, what?
They only used it to mix with moonshine.
Really? Then why does it burn? Well, I guess this is where we'll end today's episode. I think I'm going to enjoy some of that dynamite in a glass now, and avoid the commercial version. If you enjoy these stories and want to make sure you don't miss out on the next episode, join my mailing list. I'll have it linked in the show description. I hope you'll join me for more of these stories in the future, but for now, I'm Ryan Heinzen, and this has been the Spirit of Poitin. On the next episode of The Spirit of, I'm going to be selfish and tell you a shorter story. Don't take it personally, I've just got some studying I need to focus on. I promise that even though it'll be short, it'll be sweet. And it involves someone poorly playing the bagpipes. And of course, more whiskey. I'll see you there.